Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday night. It's great to have you here. The way tonight is going to work is going to be a little different than it will be in the future. So we're going to do something similar to, for those of you that were with me on Sunday, I am going to be doing something similar to that. So at the current time, I have the plan set up is that I will go through questions I received in advance. I am going to do a cutoff in the future that if you don't get your message to me by a certain time, then I'll just go ahead and have you add it to that live chat. So I'm thinking everyone that needed to get questions to me did. If you didn't, if you have a question this week, it doesn't need to be on the topic, but if you have a question, you can just go ahead and type it in. Hi, Judy. Judy's here. So you can just go ahead and type it in the live chat if you do have any questions. Like I said, I have a couple of questions from people this week, but if you have questions and want to add them to the live chat, that would be great because I have time for more. And again, they don't need to be on topic. This week we've been talking about fear and living in a state of potentially not being afraid. So the way this looks is the fact that when the amygdala triggers, it's a fight or flight response that's fear-based. But what the response is to is threat of death. So anything our brain considers a threat, it responds to with this trigger. And of course, the threats are now at our level of society and the way we live now, those threats are social. A lot of them are very social. So the threat of losing people or financial threats, right? A lot of people aren't working right now and they might be having that financial threat, or threats of the virus, of getting sick or feeling an earthquake. All of these things are threats that we feel, and so the brain responds with fear in the primal state. And so what we've been talking about all week is how does the brain respond if it's not a fear state? What does it mean to be threatened and not be afraid? A lot of people can't comprehend that. They can't wrap their head around it. Like, how could I possibly not respond with fear? And that's because it's been so inherent to us. So somebody asked me this week, if I could, during this group, describe the experience I went through with Anna, because they felt like if there was anything that they saw happening in the world that was really threatening, was the experience I had with my daughter this last year, and how I responded to that. So that what happened with her started about January of last year, and that was the first time she'd ever in her life uttered the words, "I don't want to live." And it was after a breakup. And so initially it was startling. It was startling to me. I was shocked because I know those words are significant, that anytime anyone says them, we need to take that seriously. But I knew she was upset, and I knew she had just lost her best friend. The person had been her best friend for like the last 5 years. And it was heartbreaking to her because the whole year before she went through a lot of trauma with people in his life. And so it was like this culmination of a really bad year. And she was really devastated. And I remembered at that time, the first thing I wanted to do, my first response was I wanted to rescue her. And that's a fight or flight response, right? To this idea of rescuing. I was at that point with my brain still not really as fearful, but just startled when it happened. So throughout the year, she went through a lot that could have driven a lot of fear. She's struggles with addiction, and she had this relationship that was off and on that was really crushing to her in a lot of ways. And she turned against me. She just started to really push me out of her life. And so here was that first moment where I got to have one of those experiences that was threat of loss, because I raised Anna alone as a single mom, and it was like her and I, and my son was older, and so he wasn't there for a lot of her growing up, but it was this experience of this person that I'd been sharing this life with and this potential of losing her. And initially that little fight triggered, that fight or flight response triggered, and I wanted to reach out and connect. But then I did my practices. So at that point, I wasn't where I am now. I've come a long way, even in the past year. And so I just returned to my practices. I knew reaching out, I knew it was making it worse. It was pushing her away. And I was trying to control, because that used to be my fear response, is control. And so I did my practices. I did my mythology. I had one day that was so bad that I wrote 10,000 words in a 24-hour period, because I said, I'm not doing anything else in my life. I need to get a handle on what's happening to me right now. And as I did that, I really did, at the end of that, have clarity. And I woke up the next day actually feeling good and believing things would be okay. Now, nothing in the situation with her had changed, but my chemistry had changed. And so in September of last year, so we went through this between like March, April to September, she was not living at home, and I was finding my peace with that, with doing my practices. And that's the thing. I didn't try and find my peace or analyze it or try to connect. I did my practices. And then in September, I got a call at about 3 o'clock in the morning from the police, and they told me she had attempted suicide, that she was threatening an attempt, and that she had been taken to the local hospital, that the police had taken her to the local hospital as a suicide risk. And I remember in that moment, immediately my brain's response was, oh, well, someone is taking care of her. There's nothing I can do. The best thing I can do is go back to sleep, and then I can be there for her when she needs me, and I won't be tired. Now, in the past, even a couple years ago, I would have had a meltdown. I would have been up. I would have been stressed. I probably would have been nauseous and possibly crying. I would have still been emotional even a couple years ago, but I had done enough in practices that my immediate response was, the smart thing to do is go back to bed. And I actually laid down and fell back asleep. When I had PTSD, insomnia was my worst thing. If I woke up in the middle of the night, that's it. I wasn't going to be able to fall back asleep, not for at least a couple hours. That often happened for me, or it would take me several hours to fall asleep in the first place. I was back to sleep in minutes, not because I didn't care, but because I knew that was the right thing, and I knew she was taken care of somewhere. But I couldn't have known those things from a fear response brain. If I was in there caught up feeling stress, I couldn't have known those things. And then, so throughout this time, she came and lived with me, and several times she left the house, said she couldn't take it anymore, left the house, told me she was going to end it, and then blocked me so that she wouldn't receive my calls. They'd go straight to voicemail, or sometimes even social media. I'd try and reach out on social media, but I, again, returned to my practices. That was probably the scariest time for me, was that time where she'd leave the house, say she was done, go off in her car, and then not come home for a couple days and block me. And I didn't know if she was alive or dead. And all I had in those moments were my practices. Now, a lot of people are feeling this way right now with this virus, or financially. Maybe you feel alone in the world. Like, what am I going to do? I mean, they're talking about extending this social distancing, and it's a good idea. Social distancing is so important right now, because it's not even about, like with me, I won't get sick. This virus is not going to hurt me. I have a very strong immune system, and it's only dangerous to people with weakened immune systems. But that doesn't mean I can't spread it. So I'm being very aware of social distancing. I know I'm safe, but I'm being very cautious in my movement because I'm aware. And so there are a lot of people out there that are legitimately afraid. Between that and the earthquakes that we had, there are a lot of people here that really feel like something is happening in the world. That, especially if you have a spiritual belief that this is bound to happen. The point is this: whether the world is coming to an end or not, whether it is legitimately end times and these things that are in a lot of spiritual philosophies, or if it's another virus, or if it's not even that big a deal and that the media is all hype about it, even if it is any one of those things, our concern is not about picking which one of those it is, because we can't possibly know. Our concern is, how am I through this? How am I feeling? What do I want to experience? Do I want to be in fear? We can't make good decisions from fear. Our prefrontal cortex is shut off. So being in fear is not going to help me. It's not going to help any of us. We really need to be in our most lucid, innovative thought. We need to be inspired and working towards possibilities so that we can move through this as successfully as possible. So, I want to go on with Anna just to finish up this story, to finish up this question, and that is the fact that we made it through those few months, and she was in hospitals a couple of times, and they finally got her on a medication that was working for her, and I had made the mistake. So she was stabilizing. She wasn't quite as good. She is taking medication now because that's the path she's choosing to take. She does do some of the practices from my program, but she wants to do it her own way. She doesn't want to do what her mom's doing, and I respect that. I wish she would, because then I would know for sure she was safe. But she's doing it her way, and I honor and respect that, and I can be in that space. But there was one day that I came back from being away and left her pill bottle on the counter. And I went somewhere and I came back and she had swallowed them. And in that moment, even when it could have felt like the most devastation in the world, I said, okay, let's go to the hospital. And I put her in the car, and I didn't worry about all the debt we had because of the last 2 visits. So she was in the hospital twice in psych ward. So that's like $10,000 each time. And I didn't worry about that. I didn't connect with any of it. I said, okay, we need to go to the hospital. And my mind was like, anything I need to work out, I'll work out. And then on the way to the hospital, I was in this moment of real clarity because I had been doing my work. And I asked her, what makes you want to live? And we started talking, and that's when we came to the realization of why she was really suicidal. What was at the root of it? And that was that she was no longer saving the lives of dogs. She had since she was 13 been at the Humane Society saving dogs' lives, and she had switched over to working in a kennel. And taking care of dogs, babysitting them during the day, wasn't the same as saving their lives. Her life didn't have the meaning it needed to have. And so in that conversation, everything changed. That time when she went in the hospital, she wanted to make it better. She became more clear. She now has her own apartment, and she's working at a shelter, and she's saving animals again. She's making a difference in their world, and she's working toward working with Humane Society International. So even in all of those moments, whether she pushed me away or was harming herself, everything was about, how can I respond if I'm in fear? Now, if I'd had that same situation and I had a fear response, if I had let my amygdala I would have pushed her away. we were already on that track. If I hadn't returned to that 10,000 words of mythology to shift my mental function, and again, the mythology didn't say anything. It didn't have anything to do with Anna or me. I was changing the brain function. So if I hadn't have done that, I would have pushed her away, and she would have never reached out at the time when she was most suicidal. And I wouldn't have been able to be there to help. It would have just escalated and spiraled, because that's what fear does. Fear begets more fear. And it's always future-based. Every time we have fear, it's because we're afraid of what might happen. Even if someone has a gun to your head, it may be that you're afraid they might pull the trigger. It's not inherent that we need to be afraid if someone puts a gun to our head. That's not an inherent quality. It is inherent to the amygdala, but is not if the amygdala is reduced, it's not there. That response isn't the same. And that was what was most clear to me when I was woken up at 3:00 in the morning by a call from the police, is the fact that, wow, I'm able to go back to sleep. That was astounding to me with the kind of insomnia I suffered with PTSD. So this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about having a different internal response, because our internal responses aren't inherent to who we are. So that was kind of a long explanation, but I really, when the person brought it up, it was really moving for me to realize how important that was. The second question I received was about not being reactive. Now, I want to take this in the direction of more than just answering that question about not being reactive. I want to take it in the direction of when I am reactive. When I do these knee-jerk reactions, it's usually not a good decision. So one of the things I learned as I started to improve my brain function is I was able to start saying, let me just take a breath before I make a decision. And so I got in this habit of when people would ask me questions saying, let me think about it. And I didn't have that. I wouldn't say, let me think about it when my amygdala was triggered. But when I could maintain clarity, I could say, okay, let me think about it. Because it gave me a chance to pause and catch my breath before I made my decisions. And this was huge. This has been huge for me for months. And so I want to talk about this reactive state in the fact that the amygdala feels like it's telling us the truth. When we decide, oh, this is what I need to do, and we're doing it in that frantic state, that's not clarity. That's not the same as knowing. That's not intuition. Intuition comes from a calm, centered place, and sometimes it seems extremely counterintuitive to what we would typically do. But that's because it's new, right? Because part of this space that we're creating is observational. So if you think about the fact that if something happens, this happened for me with the earthquake. When the earthquake came, I was fascinated. I was like, what? Oh my gosh, this is so cool, because it shook hard, and then it felt like my bed was just floating. So I was sitting there and I was awake when it happened, but it just felt like I was on a boat. And I was like, wow, that is a whole big piece of earth moving right now. So when I woke up and that happened with the earthquake, and I was just so amazed by it, it was a state of observation. And throughout the whole day, I felt this observation. I was getting texts from everyone asking if I was okay, but also I was getting, watching people get really scared. Like this was like they were worried about like the world imploding. And it was really interesting to me to observe that, because for me, the earthquake had happened, and then it was done happening, and there were aftershocks, which would be typical. But it was interesting because I got a chance to observe everybody else's experience with it. And as I observed it, I became more involved in my own process. So I had this chance to observe other people. I also had a chance to observe myself. My dogs, one of my dogs, the second big shake, the dog was barking. And I'm like, why is the dog barking? Because this dog doesn't bark. It's not my little one, it's the big one. But this dog doesn't bark. And then right after he was barking, the second one hit. And I'm like, oh, he felt it before it came, and he was barking at it. He didn't want it to happen. And even in another moment when the big shake in the afternoon happened, or late morning, my little dog attacked the bigger dog when it happened, just because his fear response, he didn't know how to handle the earth was shaking. So I had this chance to just observe all that. And so when the person asked about being reactive, if we're in the middle of our reaction and acting on that, we don't have a chance to observe. So this is where I talk about the flow of life is not a river. The flow of life is like the ocean. It should be 2 steps forward and 1 step back, because we should be pausing. We take that step forward, then we need to pause and see what came of that step we took. And then we'll see the best direction to go to take our next step. We're often moving in this straight line, barreling towards something. And oftentimes we don't even realize it's a straight line in the wrong direction until we're way off course. I had someone say that about private sessions with me. She said, I like weekly sessions with you because I veer off. I go off track, and then I come in here and you're like, oh, nope, we're over here. And you just bring me back and give me that clarity. And that we should all be doing that, pausing. We should all be checking in with ourselves on that. That's funny. Well, okay, Jamie, what you just shared is funny. And the reason why what Jamie shared is funny is because that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? You can't figure out the simplest things. And all of a sudden, here's this vulnerability. Here's this, what am I going to do? I need this comfort of this rope, and I can't, my brain won't work properly to find where what I need is. Now, think about this. Imagine that earthquake happened for 5 minutes, right? It was a shake that literally lasted seconds. Imagine it going on for 5 minutes at that shake, and things falling off your walls, and getting everyone that's important to you, your animals, your family, outside where they might be safer than in a building. Imagine doing that from that state of mind, right? I had someone I worked with, and their mother had a heart attack, and they sent me a note to tell me. And my response to the text was, okay, are you doing your practices? And they were really upset with me. They were very upset. And they came back and they said, I was, so upset with you because all I needed from you was a little compassion. And I told them, that was the most compassionate thing I could do. From my perspective, the most compassionate thing I could do was help get you out of your trigger. Because if you're going to be in a state where this is a tragedy, you're not going to be in the best state to communicate with the doctors. First of all, you're going to be sick and destroying your body, but also your mom needs you. Your mom needs you there to help her recover. And if you're stressed out, that's not helping her. It's not making her feel more secure. It's not helping you make the best decisions for her. And so going into the right chemistry can be really vital in these times. So I'm really glad you shared that, Jamie, because it made a really good point about how our brains just suddenly go to, I need protection. And this is the difference. This is the biggest difference I stress. And if you've ever experienced it, it's a clear defining line. If you haven't, you'll know it. But that is, in this fear place, we feel vulnerable and need to be protected and feel safe. It's like what we talked about on the Brain Hack on Monday, that I need to feel safe. Something needs to make me feel safe. So needing safety is a vulnerable position. So you can equate it to like a child that needs protection. We feel vulnerable and the world feels big and it's happening to us. When you're in the advanced brain function, when the amygdala is shrunk and not triggered, whatever thing happens, your amygdala doesn't trigger, that is capable and confident. It's this, okay, whatever happens, I can handle it. I remember hearing stuff falling in my house and I thought, oh, stuff is probably breaking out there. I should go look at what it is. And I casually walked out and a couple of things were broken. There were things I had to throw away. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that happened. Interesting, right? Because I'm not wrapped up in trying to feel safe. I feel very confident. I can plan what I'm going to do and how to handle it. The last question that came to me was actually somebody asking, what do we do? What do we do if things aren't okay? What do we do if it's months before I can go back to work, was the question. But I want to expand that out. What do we do if it's we start to lose people that we love, that we care about, right? The social distancing for people over 80 started quickly. My parents have been locked in their apartment for quite a bit of time. I think the beginning of March, like right after news started to travel about the outbreak, they stopped allowing visitors. And so, there's that very real fact. Like, what if the wrong person connects with the wrong person and somebody walks into the place where she lives and a bunch of people there get it? Or what if that earthquake had been much bigger, and what if my house had collapsed around me? We can get really caught up in these what ifs. And again, this is the amygdala. But what I want to talk about is what we can do. So I can talk all day about my brain and where it is now after 4.5 years of practice. But I want to talk about what you can do, because your brain might be in that place where it triggers. So the very first thing I'm going to say, and you'll probably can all say it with me, is do your practices and do them before bed. It is the best time. It is when you reap the most benefit. I'm going to talk next week. So my topics are going to change next week. I'm still going to answer questions, but I'm going to have this new focus be on, what do I do with this time? How do I move forward? How do I live forward? And so that's why I saved this question. I see Judy's put something up, and so I'm going to look at that in just 1 second. But I had this this idea about how taking advantage of this time, really, like, we have time. All of us have more time. Even if you're still going to work somewhere, we have more time because our social life has been kind of taken away from us to an extent. So we have this opportunity for more time. So I want to shift the focus to, how can I just really propel my life forward in a big way over the next month? Because I have this opportunity. And so we're going to put on that focus. And that's part of my answer to this question is, first of all, don't give yourself idle time. Don't do things that are triggering. Don't sit and watch the news if it's upsetting you. Make sure you have time every day that you're committing to building a feeling of success. The best thing for the brain is to feel successful. This is why we do exercises that we're horrible at, so that when we do a good job, like if we're coloring with our non-dominant hand and we're terrible, and then one day we do a really good job, we're so proud of ourselves. And that's the point. Or if we finally learn how to juggle, or any of these things. But I suggest working on something that means something to you. So something you've always wanted to do. YouTube has a ton of campaigns on learn to do this and learn to do that. They're doing a whole at-home campaign of videos that are things you can learn to do. And I'm going to be part of that. I'm going to, help people build forward. And that's going to start with the next brain hack. But do things, little things. If you have a garage you haven't cleaned out, I saw people out all week this week on my street doing yard work, and I wish I had time. I'm going out on Friday in my yard, and I am going to be outside, and I'm going to clear out some stuff. But I did that. A couple of rooms in my house, I did it, and I feel good when I walk into them because I feel that success and that clarity. So if you have stuff you haven't gone through, so take a little bit a day. Just tell yourself, okay, I'm just going to open this one box I need to go through. And then just work as long as you can. And then once you feel fatigued or done, stop. You just did a little more than you would have. And so that kind of leads into next week's brain hack. I'm going to get into it deeper, but that's my response. What if the worst happens? We should start preparing for making the best of our lives. Each of us has our life to live, and all sorts of things can happen in the world. But if we're going to be a huge part of making an impact on the world, we need to develop ourselves. So that's going to be a really huge part of it. I'm realizing I didn't turn on any lights and it's getting darker. So if we go much longer, I might have to pop up and turn on a light or something. So I apologize. It's kind of getting, the video quality is waning quickly. So that is the answer to that question. Again, I'm going to go into it deeper next week. Okay, so I see Judy's point about so when you're in an area where they have a lot of earthquakes, they're not going to react. Because why? It's familiar. Right? The amygdala reacts to what's not familiar, what's unfamiliar. So of course, if you're in a place that has a lot of earthquakes, they really don't respond that much because it's not some unfamiliar thing that's posing a threat. They already know how to handle it because it's familiar. And that's the big difference between the amygdala. They're calm because it's familiar, because it happens all the time, right? Most of us don't freak out if there's a big snowstorm. Driving, we do, because we have really good road crews in Utah. So they always clear our roads for us. So a lot of Utahns know how to drive in snow. But we don't avoid the mountains or fear the snow, right? But if somebody had never seen snow before and saw it pile up 3 or 4 feet, it might trigger them. I remember driving up in the mountains, and I was driving over a pass that had 12-foot banks of snow. So I was in my little truck, and the snow was taller than me on both sides. And it was super intimidating. My brain immediately responded to it as threat. This was a very long time ago. And so anytime it's unfamiliar, right? And earthquakes are unfamiliar. We haven't had a big earthquake, I think they said, since 1994. That is a long time. So it's an unfamiliar thing. So what I want to do is I am going to see if I can't improve the light. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a chance to ask me any more questions you might have. So I'm going to vanish for a minute, and I'm going to get a light just in case you do. Yeah, thanks for your comment, Judy. These are good ways. So all these things I talk about, this could be a good exercise for people. All these things I talk about with this idea of fight or flight response, it's good to connect those with your life. It's good to be able to find the interlacing of them, find the real life examples. Of course, there's a lot going on right now that I can talk about generally that becomes real life examples. But you can look at your life and say, this is a real life example of something happening. And so you can then correlate it. It's kind of like, the earthquake here versus when you were in Japan. It's this, Oh, no, I see the difference from when the amygdala triggers and when it doesn't. So it becomes something that makes it more relatable. Anything you can take where if I'm talking about something, you're like, I just can't even imagine that. Try to find ways to connect to it being relatable. Try to find ways to have it be something that you can tie to or connect to something else. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. And so I'm going to start my wind up. If somebody wants to throw something on real quick, I will answer it. I've been loading so many classes where I put a couple classes on Udemy. Also, we're looking at putting some on Teachable and possibly Thinkific to just try having them out on some formats. They're still on my website, easy to get to on my website, but those others are we just want to see kind of what happens in those new formats. I have somebody that wanted to do that work, so they're doing that work for me. But I had to get a lot of class stuff online for them. So all the classes that are there will be loaded up soon. So I will be having the session at 2:30 on Sunday. Definitely. So we will be doing that. I don't know if it'll be on YouTube or in the new format by then, but I will definitely let you know. And then in the meantime, because my light fell, I think that's just, I don't see any other questions or anything. But so since we're at that point, I've put the announcements out and all of that. Again, if you have any other questions, put them in comments. And until then, I will look forward to connecting with you at the next live stream. I hope everyone has an amazing evening.